I'm talking with Marty Roesch, who's VP and Chief Security Architect at Cisco. Welcome, Marty.
Good morning.
Well, once again, we're in a tumultuous time in our industry. What are some of the major trends that you're seeing in security?
Well, I think one of the bigger trends that we're seeing right now is really, I think people are starting to realize that, everybody who's reading the papers can't help but notice that places keep getting hacked despite the fact that we have all these supposedly advanced technologies and techniques for defending these environments, which kind of begs the question, what's going on here? And I think that one of the trends that we're starting to see is the security industry starting to kind of scratch its head and say, but I built next generation advanced protection, threat sandboxing, and all the other stuff
with big data.
With big data, and I'm still not able to keep these guys out. So I think one of the big problems that we're seeing is that all the fragmentation across the different technologies that are out there, all the complexity that they bring to the table. I've heard it said over and over again, complexity is the enemy of security, and I think we're seeing it. We have been kind of empirically asking around many of our customers, and what we hear is, how many security vendors are you working with? We hear 40, 50, 60.
Yeah.
So what if you had 40 or 50, 60 different consoles and 40 or 50 or 60 different ways of defining bad, and all the reporting that comes out of those systems? How do you make sense of what's going on? And this is what we've been seeing, some of these high profile events that have been in the news. They detected the attacks, the technology worked just fine, but nobody was doing anything about it. It wasn't configured to stop it automatically because people were really skittish about that. And it was relying on people, and the people were ignoring it, or they didn't know how to use it, or it hadn't been properly operationalized yet. So that's a big trend that we see. On the attacker side, we see that it's kind of the Wild West for them right now. There's definitely a lot of opportunity for the bad guys, and they're getting very professional. I've been talking about this idea of the industrialization of hacking for about 5 years now, and we're seeing it. They have quality assurance, they do testing, they beta test their attacks where they'll go characterize the defenses they're facing, acquire them, install them, configure them, and then defeat them before they even throw the attack against the live target. So there's a lot of really interesting things going on, and it's getting to be much more of a professionalized attacker force, while the defenders are trying to figure out how to start addressing this complexity problem and driving smarter ways to be able to defeat the attackers.
You must be exposed, especially now through Cisco, to very, very large enterprises, the ones that have these 40 or more security products. What are the best practices? What's helping them?
The things that they're doing right now is, they're trying to, in many cases, focus on fewer vendors. I think that they talk about trying to build and buy and acquire and install architectures and things like that. And they're also working with service providers and trying to get into these threat intelligence programs and things like that to be able to have a broader awareness of what's going on out there, while they work to formalize their security practices internally. So we see a lot of that going on. I think that the other things that they're doing is they're trying to start working more intelligently with the data. They're getting into data mining and analytics, which we see with some of these big data engines and all the machine learning activities that are going on. So they're starting to turn towards the notion of, there's more to life and security than just having an array of controls out there. There's the whole analytics side and dealing with the data that these systems produce, and then being able to intelligently process, manage, and respond to the information that they're receiving.
Obviously, Cisco would be a candidate for a vendor to focus in on if you're a buyer, if you want fewer vendors to deal with and you want products that work together. But I categorize 80 different buckets for the security industry. They've got 40 products. Where does Cisco draw the line about things you will do and things that you're not interested in?
Well, we have to pick and choose what we do, just like everybody, because at the end of the day, even though we're a very large company, we have finite resources. So the areas that we're very focused on right now are primarily centered on what we call threat-centric security. And the idea of threat-centric security, previously, and for kind of majority of the lifespan of the security industry, most of the effort's been placed around controls, brokering access between users, applications, data, and devices, and kind of structuring the environment so that it operates properly. And the problem with this approach is that it presupposes that the integrity of the environment that you're building it on is actually secure. But what if it's not? What if you can't actually manage what's being executed on the CPUs, the contents of the RAM, how the network is being utilized? What if you can't, in fact, keep attackers out? Because all these controls work okay as long as you haven't been broken into. But what we've seen historically is that as soon as you do suffer a compromise, you've got a huge problem with the attacker becoming an authorized user in the environment and being able to essentially move at will in many cases. So this threat-centric security notion is essentially to focus on maintaining the integrity of the environment and giving people the ability to essentially respond quickly when an attacker does get in so that your exposure and your loss of control is minimized and you can regain the integrity of the environment so that you can do security. Because quite frankly, if you can't control what's executed on your CPUs, this is why we can't have nice things. You don't get to do security if you can't maintain the integrity of your environment.
And you invested significantly in that at SourceFire and now brought it with the AMP product lines.
Yes, and we also acquired ThreatGrid last year as well. So when we look at, kind of across the threat continuum, which is something that we've talked about for a while, first at SourceFire and now at Cisco, worrying about security before an attacker shows up, during an attack, and after you've been compromised. What we see historically is that Cisco had very strong offerings in the before column, a good set of offerings in the during column, and then not much in the after column. Whereas with SourceFire, we had highly developed during and after technologies and some good stuff in the before column, but not a lot. So bringing these two together really amplified the capabilities that Cisco could bring to bear. And now with the addition of ThreatGrid and cognitive security, there's a bunch of really interesting capabilities that we have across the entire threat continuum. And it gives, and the technologies are actually becoming well integrated with each other to be able to be kind of self-reinforcing and share information effectively. So yeah, we've done a lot of work to drive what we believe is a better security architecture for maintaining and recovering the integrity of environments that are constantly under attack.
Every year when we talk, there's always, in the backs of our minds anyways, some major breaches that have occurred since the previous year, and it's making news, and you would think now people would pay attention. But by 2015, we're going to see some even bigger breaches, right?
Probably.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm hearing rumors of some big breaches that are being investigated right now that nobody's even heard about yet, but they're bigger than anything else.
Oh boy.
So that's a news cycle at any rate, and obviously, the security industry feeds off of that news cycle because it helps raise the awareness. Are retailers, for instance, actually going to get better?
I think they are. I think there's been enough high-profile attacks and action at the executive and board level in some of these breached companies that it's getting very, the reality of it is kind of starting to sink in to the executive teams and at the board levels of these major companies, and they're starting to take it much more seriously and starting to look at much more considered approaches to doing security, just not just checkbox compliance with whatever compliance regimes they have to adhere to. So I think that you're starting to see maturity creep into it. I think it takes a while, just like it has in other industries like finance, but the desire is there because nobody wants to show up on the front page of the New York Times, on Black Friday, right? That's not a good place to be.
So Marty, you're easily one of the pioneers of the security industry, and you've grown your own company. You've created a large open source organization, took a company public, managed a public company, now part of Cisco. When I look at the startup environment, there are more startups in security than I've ever seen in 15 years. What advice would you give to the smart kid getting out of college and gets into security, all of a sudden sees a gap and wants to create a company?
Don't be afraid to try it. When I started SourceFire, it was I had no experience on the business side of business. I was, an engineer by education, and that's all I'd ever tried to be. And then all of a sudden, I decided to go incorporate my own company and get going. It's in some ways, it's not as hard as it looks. In other ways, it's a lot harder. But it is surprising to me how approachable the business side of the problems was. And as you grow the company, how they become sophisticated, and you have to be a lot more nuanced in your approach to them. But in the beginning, especially, you can get the ball rolling, and you don't have to have, at SourceFire, we didn't have in the first year very much money. We didn't have fancy facilities. We had hand-built computers. It was all very, very minimal to get it going. But if you're a software company, you can completely do that. So I would encourage people to not be afraid to try. I would encourage people to attack big problems. Yet another user interface, yet another analytics platform, yet another traffic processing scheme. Many of these have been thought of and attempted, and there's a lot of other things that need to be attacked in the security domain that haven't had a tremendous amount of effort applied to them. Whether it be areas of encryption, new attack detection methodologies, leveraging the cloud more effectively, or having cloud-based security offerings that more naturally fit in with kind of the world as it's going more mobile and more cloud-based. I think there are a lot of interesting things out there that really haven't been tried. So I would encourage people to, if you've got a really hard idea and a not quite so hard idea, go for the hard one first and see if you can make a go of it. Because when we got going in my company, it was, the hard problem was figuring out how to actually execute our business model. I felt like we had really good technology to get started with, but I had an exotic business model, this hybrid open source and proprietary business model that I was trying to execute on, which was actually a very interesting problem and hadn't been done, certainly not at the level that we executed on it before. So, yep, I would say go for it, definitely, and be sure to tap the expertise of the people around you. There's lots of entrepreneurs who've been there, done that, who are happy to give advice.
Cool. So what's the next big problem that Cisco's thinking of attacking?
The bigger thing that we're thinking of attacking right now is what we call integrated threat defense architecture, and this is kind of the natural evolution of some of the ideas that we originally had at SourceFire for building not just a context-driven security platform that understood its environment, but really turning it into a Cisco-scale solution for managing huge networks of security infrastructure and leveraging intelligence about the environments in which we're operating, plus the external threat environment. There's a big problem in security today in that the security technologies that we have are largely operated completely manually. So if you have 40 security technologies of 40 different UIs and 40 different languages for describing bad and 40 different reporting systems, you're going to have a hard time managing all this complexity. And as we introduce more security technologies, it doesn't get any better. So the idea that we're trying to move forward with at Cisco is, what if we could start building a platform to share the visibility that the technologies have effectively? Because when you look at the way that most companies integrate technologies, so you see some of the big acquisitive security companies, they acquire a bunch of companies, and the way that they typically integrate is they do what I call back-end integration, where you're dumping all the events into a common event manager and then hoping goodness will occur. Mm-hmm. This is fine, and it makes a lot of sense to do it, but you're actually, in a lot of ways, minimizing what you can do with that technology, because you're not able to take advantage of what that technology can see beyond the security event stream that it's generating. A lot of your security technologies know a lot about the environment that they're operating within, whether it be a VPN client that knows what software you're running on your device and the attributes of your device and who's on it, whether it be an intrusion prevention engine that understands the devices that are plugged into the network and what protocols they like to speak, or it be an anti-malware system that sees software running on your device and can tell you, hey, this isn't malware, but it is something that gets attacked a lot, and it might be interesting to have that piece of information. Well, what if I could externalize all this information from all these different security platforms and put it in one place and build up one unified map of the network that I'm operating within, essentially building a data platform for describing the operating environment that my security technologies live in. If I have that, I can start building automation on top of that visibility platform. So I can build automated tuning systems that'll recommend better tuning configurations for my security infrastructure. I can build impact assessors that will look at the security event streams and tell us which ones are more or less important in our environment. I can build indicator compromise engines that understand the environment that compromises are occurring in, or even be able to tie together compromises occurring across different devices into a picture of a larger compromise that happens. I could build anomaly detection engines that will sit there and sift through the data across my entire environment, not just the security events, but also the configuration events. Hey, this device just changed its configuration. Hey, somebody new who's never logged into this device logged into it today. So I can build all sorts of interesting things on top of this, this visibility platform, and I can drive that information back into my security infrastructure so that its posture adjusts with the changes in the network environment, so it's more appropriately configured, it's more resistant to evasion, and it produces higher quality information at the same time. So this is the really big challenge that we're moving forward on right now.
All of a sudden I'm starting to feel sorry for the attackers.
Oh, well.
This will be complicated.
It's it's an arms race. They'll figure out their next move after we do our next move.
That's right. Great. Thank you so much, Marty.
Thank you.